Okay, Daniela and Riva, you were two of many producers on Beasts of No Nation. Uh, Tell us
Not so
about.
many, Zach. Not so many.
Well,
That's an
it took a while
auspicious
to locate
beginning
your
right
names
there.
on the Internet Movie Database. So,
Yes, there are
um,
a number of executive producers on the film.
right, right. But you were two of the main producers. So tell us about your involvement, how you came aboard this project.
Um, Reeve and I started a company called Red Crown about 5 years ago with our third partner, Dan Crown. And when we started the company, one of the things that we did was put together sort of a short list of directors that we aspired to work with.
Mhm.
And Cary Fukunaga was the top of that list. We had seen a movie he had done called Sin Nombre, and he had just completed a film called Jane Eyre.
Which we
And
hadn't seen yet because it was not even out at the time we
that's
started
right.
this whole journey with Carrie.
But we had been so impressed with Sin Nombre and just sort of felt like he was a star on the rise, and that if we could somehow manage to work with him before the entire world discovered him, it would be great for us. Um, so our CE at the time had interned at Focus Features and had read like every script that had existed there, and Carrie had developed this script for them. And he said to us, his name is Elish, he said to us, have you read this script, Beasts of No Nation? It's based on this amazing book, and neither Riva or I had. And he sent it to us, and I remember, Riva, you can sort of jump in here, but Riva and I literally read it simultaneously, like she was in her office and I was in my office, and we were sort of screaming back and forth, and we're so moved by the script in a way that we really hadn't been in a really long time. Um,
Mhm.
and so that sort of launched things. Go ahead, Reeve.
Yes, I mean, it's rare to read something where you feel like at once like you're learning something that you don't know and seeing a world in which you haven't explored or you haven't seen explored in a way that's so sort of artistic and eloquent and beautiful, but it was also incredibly emotional and powerful and raw and hard. And so despite all of the sort of natural production complications that were on the page, it was something that I think Daniela and I and Dan were like, we want to jump into this, we want to tell this story, and we want to work with this filmmaker. So we were like putting our passion for the piece in the number one driving seat and letting the sort
Mm-hmm.
of the challenges that were on the page take a backseat to wanting to make the movie.
Yeah. And I think one of the other things we sort of just wanted to do when we started the company was really try to produce films that felt like they were starting a conversation in some way or moving the needle in some way, and really trying to find projects that felt like they weren't derivative and felt like they were trying to say something new. And this script sort of had that in spades. It felt just wholly original. Um, So we sat down with Cary, and this was actually before he went into start work on True Detective. And we didn't know that that was something he was planning on doing, and we hoped that he would jump right in with us. And he was like, "No, I don't feel emotionally ready to make this movie. I'm going to go do this thing for HBO called True Detective." And he literally was like, "I'm not sure what it is. Like, I'm not sure it's going to work." Um, and at the time, we were kind of devastated because we really were so ready to jump in. But it ended up being the best thing for the production, because True Detective became such a like incredible cultural event. And suddenly everyone knew who Carrie was.
Right. And it did, we were the producers and the financiers of the film. And so, putting money together for a child soldier war story with a cast, with the exception of Idris, that were non-actors is an obvious challenge. And so sort of as, the world became aware of Carrie as we were really starting to take the project out and make people aware of it and raise and put together the financing for the film.
Yeah. But even despite that, we the way these independent films are traditionally put together, and Zach, I'm sure you know a little bit about this, but that you often pre-sell some territories just to ensure that the budget you're setting is an appropriate one. So we went to Toronto sort of 6 months before we were to start shooting and tried to pre-sell it a couple of territories and literally could make maybe one small pre-sale. And that was a huge turning point for us because most producers will tell you if you can't pre-sell a territory, you probably shouldn't be making the movie. But we felt really so passionately about it, and so that was a real moment for Riva, Dan, and I to look each other in the face and say, are we going to move forward with this despite what the market is telling us? And we went all in. We financed it through straight equity, which is really rare in this business, and raised a lot of money. We would raise pockets of 50,000 and we would raise pockets of $1 million, and it was Riva can tell you.
Yes.
It was.
I had just given birth to my second child when we were, I think, 6 weeks out from shooting in the jungle, and so I'm on my maternity bed and, calling Daniela, speaking with financiers and investors and closing cash literally as I've, given birth to a child. So it was to say it was a passion project is an understatement in terms of how the financing came together for the film. It was piece by piece, which, as we started the conversation, sort of explains why there are so many executive producers and people who believed in the process and believed in the film to get it made.
Yeah.
Well, take us on to the set now that you've got all this, now that you've got the financing together. You're working with a lot of non-professional actors. You're working in a country that isn't used to productions of this size. So what were some of the challenges that you faced?
It's so funny. I mean, you can tell there's so many sort of harrowing anecdotes. To begin with, Cary got malaria, and many members of the crew got malaria. Cary lost 20 pounds throughout the shoot. I mean, and everyone's seen the Heart of Darkness documentary for Apocalypse Now. We like to draw that comparison. We were shooting in the middle of the jungle. We just don't have really the documentary footage to attest to how difficult it was. But every day was rain, then extreme heat, then the bugs would come out. There were just such extreme conditions that you really can't fathom. And things as simple as getting food to your crew was a huge ordeal. There's no food trucks in Ghana. There's no catering in Ghana. So literally trying to figure out how to get your crew their meal after 6 hours of work is like a full-time job.
Let's talk about also how we landed in Ghana, because even choosing the location that we were in West Africa was a very long part of the process, and sort of speaks to Cary as a filmmaker and just the process really of making the movie. So when you're putting a film together, you're also, in addition to pre-sales, you're looking at things like tax credits and where there are places you can shoot that have soft money. So naturally, one of the countries we first started to explore was South Africa, and we spent probably 9 months exploring South Africa with different, local line producers. But at the end of the day, Cary had a very specific vision, and we wanted to tell the story as authentically as possible. And the book, takes place in a sort of fictional, nameless West African country.
Yeah.
And so he kept talking about the earth, the dirt needs to be a very specific color. The color of people's skins needs to be a certain color. And so, just part of the process was sort of weeding through, what artistically his vision and the look of the film was going to be. So we went, South Africa gets crossed off the list, and then we want to explore Kenya because there's crew and there's a film infrastructure and there's, a network of people that you can be reaching out to that has the foundation of making movies there. So we fly, Cary and his producing partner and our producing partner, Amy Kaufman, over to do a recce, and we have them scout Kenya, and we have them scout Uganda, and we have them also scout Ghana, which we had identified as being sort of a safe, stable country to be working in that had zero film infrastructure, but it was stable nonetheless. And so the day after they land in Kenya, it was the terrorist mall shootings. So immediately Kenya goes off the table because it no longer is a place that we can get insurance or that the bond company will bond. So from Kenya, they go to Uganda. Uganda has very strict homosexual laws, so even shooting there would have meant changing, I'm sure you've seen the film, it would have been changing the script and sort of removing or sort of, falsifying the sodomy scene. So none of us felt comfortable with that. And then, as luck would have it, we had made sort of, heroic efforts to get Cary and Amy and our line producer Peter over to Ghana, and it ended up being the right place, sort of the look of the film, the feel of the environment, the people, ended up being the place that we were able to shoot the movie.
Mm-hmm. Yeah. Do you want to talk some more about some of these logistical things? Like, for instance, there's a lot of tanks in the film.
Yes.
Which I'm sure was, coming up with that was a bit of a challenge, and
that, you touch upon one of the most difficult parts logistically was, this movie relies heavily on that sort of army, the artillery, the soldiers, the tanks, and that was not something that our meager budget could afford. So either we were going to have to work with the Ghanaian government and the military, or we were going to have to fake it, which I think would have severely affected the scope of the film. Mm-hmm. And so I think as soon as our line producer Peter Pastorelli hits the ground with our local fixers, that was the first meeting that we had, and I think that they went back to the military with the top army brass, went and sat with them, I would say 4 or 5 times, and it was just one of those things where we really didn't know, literally till the day before we shot, whether what we were hearing in the room, which was that they wanted to work with us, was actually going to happen. So the day before the first day of shoot, there was a convoy of 20 tanks that came into our small jungle town and ended up being, sort of staying there, and 200 troops, and we suddenly were sort of opened up to the world, and we were able to access all this incredible artillery and tanks and guns, et cetera, but we really didn't know until the moment before it happened that it was going to happen. So it was incredibly stressful, particularly for our props master, whose job it was to mimic the look if we weren't going to actually get the vehicles. So, that poor guy, he lost 30 pounds on the shoot. Stressful.
All of the crew. To speak to this, the military and logistics, Cary tells this very well, but the concept of locking a street down, or the concept of picture cars, or when he would say to our local crew who are working in the AD department, we need to lock this whole street off. We're going to be, when we're shooting with the military tanks, we're going to be looking down this whole street. And they turn to him and they're like, "What, the whole street?" And he's like, "Yeah, the whole area." Because we were making such, everyone was aware that we were there. We're making, a fairly sizable footprint. People were very interested in coming out and sort of watching and seeing what was happening. But then it would interfere naturally with what Cary was trying to do. So in every department, everyone had to make, I think, really heroic efforts to get done what they were doing, from wardrobe to sound, to the production design, and using what was there, because a logistical thing, getting anything over there required putting it on a, on a ship, on a crate, and so that took 6 weeks to get there. So we had our camera equipment and the lighting gear that we did use, that was shipped out 6 weeks before we were shooting, and there was no, if something went down, there was no backup, and there was certainly nowhere else within the country to order anything from.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah, and it was a 35-day shoot, and so we really, we were on a tight schedule, and we weren't a studio, we were an independent, film company that had a certain amount of money to spend. So we couldn't go an extra 2 weeks or 3 weeks if that's what was required. We were a bonded film, and the amount of money we had was really the amount of money we had. Even though we did go a bit over budget, there was really, there was not a lot of wiggle room.
By a bit, we mean $1 million. We went into the jungle at $5 million and we left at $6 million.
Yeah.
Oh, wow.
So just things that you cannot predict were constantly coming up. And listen, you're shooting in a jungle, so we knew going in there were just things we would have no idea how to deal with. And I think it was sort of a top-down thing. Cary's some sort of this great adventurer and has been to every part of the world. And so, he sort of went into this jungle and was completely calm and confident in the fact that, like, we were going to accomplish this movie. And that sort of I wouldn't say it put everyone else at ease, but we sort of just all followed him.
He's definitely the fearless leader.
And, on the first day of the shoot, Cary's camera operator went down with a torn hamstring. And so suddenly Cary was having to operate the film as well as direct it, as well as, act as a cinematographer. I mean, he was doing triple, quadruple duty, and he was rewriting the scenes on his one day off, as well as scouting new locations. And so,
as well as taking a machete and sort of clearing out Agu's path when he's wandering through the jungle, when he finds his way to the commandant. Abraham will say he was terrified of the snakes and the sort of critters that were in the jungle, but Cary was there sort of with, blazing the path for him.
Cary loved the machete.
So, on a production of this scale, with all of these logistical problems that you're talking about, how do you not lose sight of the story of the film?
It's pretty remarkable.
Yeah.
I mean, it's what Cary is a very trusting filmmaker. And unlike many people, I think Daniela and I have worked with, within 6 weeks of coming back, he let us and Amy and Dan into the edit suite and shared a very early cut of the film with us. And that's one of the things I think we were all most struck by, is that he really was carrying the entire film on his back, literally as a cinematographer, but also having the whole vision for the story in his head. And piece by piece, the script that we read and the story that ultimately he put together are so similar in a, sort of startling way.
Yeah.
Mm-hmm.
He really is incredible that way. One of the things he did during the shoot that I thought was so smart was that he started to cut together footage so that he could show it to the crew on Sunday. And I think, a lot of the heads of department and the keys were brought in from the States and had been away from their families, not only for the shoot, but for the 3 months of prep. And so, it was a very, very difficult environment to sort of keep your head up, keep your energy up. And Cary started putting together a reel of footage every Sunday to show the crew. And I think that was really the thing that sort of bolstered the crew and kept the energy up. Because I think even when we started seeing dailies, we were completely surprised and shocked by what we were able to achieve on the budget we had. The scope of the film, I mean, you've seen it, Zach, but the scope is so great. And I think if you just saw that movie going in, you wouldn't assume that was, a $5 million budget,
But even just to talk to that, in terms of not seeing dailies, I mean, because again, we were shooting in the jungle. We weren't shooting somewhere where there was a pipeline so that we could be seeing what the film looked like. So, we were in New York, and here we are putting a film together, shooting it in the jungle, have put together and exposed all of this equity and cash to make a movie, which is not really how most independent films are put together. And we were seeing dailies maybe 2 to 3 weeks behind, recognizing it's only even a 35-day shoot, 2 to 3 weeks behind when Cary had shot something. So it was the whole experience from like soup to nuts was a very unconventional experience, and a lot of trusting of each other and trusting that the vision that Cary had going into it was going to be what we saw when we were watching the film ultimately.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah.
Lastly, I just want to ask you about, now that the film is cut together, getting it out there and getting it distributed. Can you talk about some of the hurdles of that?
Yeah, I mean, I think in retrospect, coming, like, Netflix becoming our home seems like the most natural and obvious home. I think at the time when we were first selling the film, we had sort of been married to a more traditional idea of how the film would be released. You know, it's a beautiful film, it's an important film, and you know, Netflix had not really come into this space yet. So we thought we will probably go to Focus or Fox Searchlight or one of these more traditional mini majors that do these films well and they know how to release them, and you know, it's a traditional platform release. And you know, when Netflix made a big play for this, we were a little surprised, and I think quite honestly it took us all a minute to sort of wrap our heads around the fact that we would be the first, you know, first of our kind. You know, we were worried that we would be guinea pigs. We were worried that we would be compromised. And I think Cary, yeah, go ahead, Riva.
Just to add to that, I mean, and Cary's very honest about this. I think most filmmakers, you know, certainly an auteur filmmaker the way Cary is, when you set out to make your movie, you're thinking that it's going to, you know, end up that in a movie theater is the way people are going to be, you know, embracing and digesting your film. So it definitely was, you know, it took a minute when their offer came in and they were so aggressive and passionate about the film. I think we all had to look at each other and say, okay, what is the strategy for how people are going to be watching this movie? And then recognizing that, Amy says this very well, I think for a lot of us, some of our favorite movies, some of the best movies we've ever seen, we've seen in our own homes on a VHS tape, you know, whether it's The Godfather or Apocalypse Now or whatever it is. You're not necessarily in the movie theater seeing that for the first time, but you are in the comfort of your own home. And it was sort of embracing this idea that, you know, what is different doesn't have to be negative. What is different is, okay, you know, this is the way people are consuming. And, you know, I think, you know, became exciting to be part of that.
I think just to add to that, you know, gosh, I just lost my train of thought. Sorry.
Oh, you're fine.
No. I totally agree with what Riva just said. Oh yes. Just to add to that, you know, this at its core is a child soldier film. You know, I think Riva and I and all the producers really have had all these like curious experiences where, you know, I was in the bank the other day opening up a bank account and I had to write down my information. I was a film producer, and somehow the word got out in the local branch that I had produced this movie, Beasts of No Nation, and I kid you not, 3 bank tellers came up to the table where I was opening the account and were like, this is my favorite movie of the last year. And I was like, this is extraordinary. I'm an independent film producer.
Totally.
And, you know, the average Joe on the street is seeing my movie, and I haven't had that experience before. You know, I mean, the sense that like Ted Sarandos came out the first week and said 3 million people had seen our film, and that to us is just so extraordinary that we have the reach that we do, and people are actually watching the movie is sort of beyond the scope. It's beyond what we ever expected.
It is. More people have come up to us, you know, and we've made a number of movies, but have come up to us and said, we've seen your movie, we loved your movie. And it's not even about loving the movie, just that they've seen it. And a lot of people have it just feels really good as a filmmaker. It feels good to know people are watching what you're doing.
Mm-hmm. Well, it's a great movie, and congratulations. And thank you both so much for taking the time to talk with me.
Thank you, Zach.
Thank you so much.
Talk to you soon.
Bye, guys. Thank you.
Bye. Thank you.